Good morning and welcome everyone to this amazing session today. My name is Angela Young and I am the co-founder of Art Hive Magazine, and I'm excited to welcome you all to the Business Skills for the Modern Creator presented by the Broward County Cultural Division. So today is session number 4, and every other Saturday this summer, we'll be bringing you 2 presentations on how artists and creatives just like you can launch and grow your careers. So far in our past sessions, we have covered topics such as business basics, branding and marketing, protecting your rights. So if you missed those, that's okay. We don't even know that. You can find the replay right here on either YouTube or Facebook via the Broward County Cultural Division pages. So, some important things to note before we get started for today's session. If you are joining us live, you can use the chat box and use that to talk with us and to share your comments. We want to know who you are, your creative practice, and your medium, and where you're joining us from. And I also want to make sure to note that in between the session today, we will have a break so you can fill up on your coffee and come back for the second round. So I would first like to get into it without further ado, and I want to introduce our very first speaker, Alex De Carvalho, and he will be speaking today on how to understand your consumers, their preferred communication channels, and how to develop a communication strategy to maximize your exposure. So let's have Alex take it away.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Alex. I'd like to thank the ArtServe team and Angela and Jesse and everyone else on the team that are helping. I'm more used to speaking in public in front of people or on Zoom. So this is a new experience for me. I can't see anybody. And so I feel like I'm talking to my own computer here. It's a little bit surreal, but I trust that everybody is there. In fact, why don't you indicate to me that you are there by like pressing 1 or something and into the comments so I can see that there's some activity happening. Jesse, if you'd like to go to the next slide. So who am I? Let me introduce myself. My name is Alex. I've had a long career in digital marketing. I should probably take that off the slide because it kind of ages me. But my experience includes co-founding an email marketing company in Europe, which still exists and it's traded publicly. At IBM, I was the worldwide lead for social media. I also was the regional director for Constant Contact, an email marketing company, and I was the regional director for South Florida. And also I ran a hearing aid company with 20 people. We were getting ready to sell hearing aids online, which is going to become a reality soon. As soon as the FDA regulates the sale of hearing aids, you're going to be able to go into Walgreens or buy them on Amazon, just like you would buy preset eyeglasses. Currently, I teach at BizHack Academy. I'm the lead instructor. I'm a contractor to BizHack Academy, and I've been teaching small business owners how to market digitally. So far, we've had about 130 people come through the program this year, and the next program is starting soon. I've also taught at the University of Miami, FIU. I'm on the Dean's Advisory Board at FIU on the School of Communication and Journalism. I've taught at Miami-Dade College. I've co-founded 2 large associations in South Florida. One is Refresh Miami, which is South Florida's startup and developer community. And also Social Media Club South Florida, which is all about social media. So we had a lot of agencies and freelancers who were trying to figure out social media, joined that organization. And currently I'm building, co-founded and co-creating Gray Swan Guild, which is a global association, trying to figure out COVID-19 and what the world will look like afterwards and how to build a better world. I ran a number of marketing and tech events, some of which were large. I am currently the Honorary Consul of Finland in South Florida. I am partly from Finland. My mom's from Finland. My dad was from Brazil, so I'm mixed origin. My company is Bowman Blue. I also help people heal from the abuse of toxic relationships, and I do that. That's the type of coaching that I do. Jesse, next. So today we're going to talk about consumer markets and how to research them and how to communicate to consumers online. Next. I thank you everybody for engaging in the comments. It helps to see that there's life out there on the other side of this computer. So social media gave everybody a voice, and you have so many different platforms, so many different ways to use these platforms, from YouTube to Twitter to Facebook to Snapchat. There are a lot of choices. It's daunting. Next. And I know that it's intimidating to get started, or even if you've been on social media for a while, you may have been using it more for personal reasons, and now you have a business. You're trying to, get known, create awareness about yourself, about what you're doing, about your art, and you haven't really used social media that way. It's intimidating. 65% of small businesses feel it's too complicated, or I don't know how to do it. And far and above the rest, customer acquisition is the number one desire or challenge small businesses face. But customer acquisition means many things. It means increasing the number of prospects and leads that are in front of me that I can talk to. It means increasing my presence on social media so I can make people aware of myself, increasing conversions from prospect to customer, increasing traffic on my website, and it means things like increasing my email marketing list, how do I nurture my leads, understanding the algorithms on Facebook and how it's changing, or on Instagram, and why are people not seeing my posts. Next, Justin. But not only that, there's an additional challenge right now, which is COVID, and the way COVID has changed things for everybody. And I think it's a little bit small to read, but hold on just a second. And I apologize, it's a little bit small, but I believe you'll have a copy of this presentation to look at. But so really, how did COVID change things? Well, so obviously you have less people going into stores. Many stores have been closed, especially non-essential businesses. In South Florida, we have openings and closings and reopenings and closings again. And so people are not going into store, but they're spending more time online. So they're getting familiar with new types of online spaces and offerings, and just getting used to the fact of being online, because people are at home, they have more time, they get online, they start searching for things, they get on Zoom. Many people didn't know about Zoom before the pandemic. Now Zoom is skyrocketing stock price. Wish I'd known that before. People are getting used to these new digital experiences. And there's a lot more researching online, viewing blog posts, researching, just generally before you buy, right? And so in many ways, COVID has changed our behaviors and priorities. Also, people are stuck at home, and they're thinking, well, how was I spending my time before? And why was I so busy all the time? And now I'm at home, and clearly I didn't need to be doing all of that thing. And people are changing their spending habits as well, because now that people didn't have the opportunity to go out shopping, they're at home, the shopping experience is different. And so they're thinking, well, where did I spend all my money before? Now, all of a sudden, I realize I didn't need to spend all that money. So consumers have shifted deeply because of COVID and the lockdown. Next. Now, who recognizes what this is? Bonus points I don't know if Jim is giving out bonus points, but bonus points if someone can tell me what this graphic is. And I'll pause just a second to see if anyone puts anything in. Okay, so I'm not going to hold everyone in suspense. Next. So this is the marketing funnel. And the marketing funnel is how people discover your company, how they learn more about you, how they might even try something that you offer or some kind of experience, and then buy. And then once the exclamation rainbow, I like that. That's I'm going to start calling this the exclamation rainbow. It's a funnel, yeah, pyramid, inverse pyramid, but yeah, exclamation rainbow is probably the best one I've heard. And then of course, after they buy, some people will endorse you, and all of that, of course, translates into income. Next. So when we talk about the marketing funnel, we have the top of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, and then the bottom of the funnel, and after the funnel. And so what does this mean? This means that at different stages of the buyer's experience with you and your company, they're going to have a different type of experience. In the beginning, they become aware of you, so they discover who you are. This is the top of the funnel. So top of the funnel activities would include, and as I'm speaking, if you have any ideas, put them into the comment box. So for example, right now the question is, what do you do at the top of the funnel? What are some of the activities? And so in the interest of time, I'm going to answer that, but you're welcome to put them into the comments box. At the top of the funnel, you would have social media, because this is a very outward-facing medium. Everybody's on Facebook, 2.5 billion people on Facebook. So when you post to Facebook, you're really posting out to the public. And so this is where people might discover you. Any type of social media, but also search engine optimization, search engine marketing. You're getting your website to rank highly on Google, so that when people search for something, your website pops up on the first page. People become aware of you and offerings through your content. Paid advertising also is a way for people to discover. What else? Billboard advertising, TV advertising. All of this is the very top of the funnel, where you're getting in front of people and you're getting them to discover who you are. Then you get to the middle of the funnel. So people are in their journey, they discovered who you are. What happens next? Well, they might have filled out a form on your website and they get a series of emails. So an email sequence of emails. This is a learning journey into your company, is these emails that you're sending, and people can learn more about you. Or they might download a white paper, or they might attend one of your webinars, or you might have like a 30 minutes of coaching, or so any different way that you can, or you might call them on the phone, or they might call you. They might step into your store, so they become aware of you. Now they're in your store. They're learning more about you. That's all middle of the funnel activity. A trial period could be also a middle of the funnel. I mean, they're learning more about you by trying out your product or your service. So if you take photography, portrait photography, maybe there's some kind of trial that can be offered. And then there's bottom of the funnel, which is where people are ready to buy. And so then what do you do at this point? Do you call them? Have you established a relationship with your customers? How do you get them over the edge, over the fence, to become a customer? Do you make them an offer, some kind of discount, buy one, get one free, membership level, like what do you offer in order for people to become your customers? And then after the funnel, what kind of loyalty program do you have? And how do you get people to endorse you and to become ambassadors for your business? So this is what the marketing funnel is. Next. If the dollars looked like a droplet, it would have been easier. This distracted me from my initial thought of funnel, but interesting concept. Okay. And so here's what's happened. The funnel has changed. In fact, consumer preferences have changed because of COVID, especially. And also the marketing funnel itself has changed. So what used to happen before the internet is that this top of the funnel, really the awareness and interest, was marketing, and then everything else was sales. So if you were all familiar with these TV advertising for, a car salesman saying, here's our lot, here's our cars, they're in the lot, the sun is shining, they're sweating, they're in the lot, they're shouting, and then they say, call us today, and they repeat the phone number like 5 times, right? Because they know you're not in front of the TV, you're like in the kitchen getting some food, and so the ad is louder, and they're repeating the phone number, call us now. And so why? Because the TV advertising was at the top of the funnel, and then the rest really depended on you actually going to the dealership or you calling the dealer. So now this has all changed. This marketing takes you all the way up to purchase and even through purchase, because you can even purchase things online, right? So all of marketing and sales is now online. So you no longer have to call the dealer. You can research all about your cars. You can spec out your car online. So you can do all this research before even stepping into the dealership. By the time you step into the dealership, you have probably figured out that this is the car, make, and model you want. And now you're just going to go for a test drive and to purchase it at the dealer. But everything else, I'm just using cars as an example. This is the easy one for us to relate to. But everything else has moved online. Next. And so the first step in marketing is really knowing who you want to talk to. There are a lot of people in the world. There's 7 billion people in the world. There's 300 million Americans, 20 million Floridians, 7 million people in South Florida. So these are large markets, and you would spend a lot of time, effort, and money trying to reach everybody. Of course, that makes no sense. So you need to know exactly who it is that you want to talk to, and you need to find who these people are. So let's talk about that next. So you want to know, where are your prospects? Where are your customers? Who are they in terms of age, gender, language, education, life events? Are they first-time homeowners? Are they having a baby? What is their occupation? What do they like? And especially when we're talking about online marketing, the behavioral aspect is so important. The reason for that is that these social networks that we're all spending time on know a lot of things about us. They understand our behaviors. They know what our purchases are. They know what our search history is about. They know about our politics by the way we interact with posts and what we're reading online. They know, Facebook knows our preference for luxury, our cultural affinity. It is said that these social networks, they can predict a breakup 2 weeks before it happens. So just based on people's behavior online, they know probably even better than the couple does when there's trouble and that something's going to change. That's scary, right? But this is why behaviors are so important to understand, because this is how you can then target your prospects online. And, I hope that none of this is shocking for you. It's just the reality. So, whether you have a value statement about that is separate from the fact that this is the way the world is and it exists, right? So next. And so let's say you want to target millennials, right? Well, even that is a large market, and there are different types of millennials. There's kind of like the hip annual. They want to make the world a better place. There's the gadget guru, totally into technology. There's a millennial mom, first-time mom, right? There's the clean and green millennial. There's the anti-millennial, who has more traditional values and kind of similar to the old school millennial. You can read through the descriptions. I won't go into that, but just to show that even when you say, look, just going to segment by age and demographics. Well, even there, you have different types of behaviors within. So it's important to understand those. Next. Yes, so more than 2/3 is marketing and less than 1/3 of sales. It's a lot of marketing time. It really does mean that what you post online and your content is so important because you're really doing you're marketing through all of your content, right? And so then the sales is really towards the end as people know about you. So really what we're talking about is personas. A persona or an avatar is kind of like an archetype, kind of like a stereotype of your customer. Of course, when you describe your customer, there might not be any single person that is like that, but that persona is representative of the group that you're trying to market to. And so, next. Who here has heard? So with art, it is harder to target your market. Would they usually be people like yourself? It's a good question. The nice thing about art is that in many cases, you are very inspirational. So you're inspiring people to think about larger things, larger ideas, to see the world in a new way, to see the world in the way that you see it, to give people a new perspective on life, to make them dream, or to bring beauty to their life, bring beauty and comfort to their life. And so you as an artist are creating this, and so are your customers like you. I would say that, yeah, maybe there is some part of your customers that is like you and has the same values as you do, and yet there's another part of customers who are not like you, but they do feel inspired and called by your work. And so they may not entirely understand your work, but they call something in them, in their soul, like a soul calling. The soul knows, the body knows, like they intellectually don't know why they like your art, but it's calling something deeper in them. And so they may not look like you, they may not be like you, but deeper inside, there's a calling, there's a yearning, there's an aspiration, there's an inspiration. And so, a part of your customers may not be anything like you, and yet they feel called to your work. And so that's why it's important to start to understand who is it that is called by my work, and why are they so? And so we're going to get into how to figure that out. And so buyer personas are important. And I'm going to use the example of the hearing aid company I was running. In the hearing aids, so let's say you want to sell hearing aids. Well, who's going to buy your hearing aids? Well, people with hearing loss. Is it really? So yes, we have persona, we call it Franco. This is an existing hearing aid user. So this person is someone who knows already about hearing aids. So if you think about the marketing funnel, they have already learned about hearing loss, and they've learned about the different types of models. They're even using a hearing aid. So they don't need any type of convincing. They just are ready to upgrade. They've had their hearing aid for 5 years. There's new technology, Bluetooth technology. They want something new. The hearing aid is already starting to break, so they need to buy something new. So that is Franco. But then we have a very different persona called Jane. Jane is married to someone with hearing loss. And Jane is growing very frustrated. Why? Because the TV is on always too loud, because she has to repeat herself to her spouse, because the spouse never hears what she's saying, because they're getting into fights because he doesn't understand her intonation. He cannot hear the intonation, the sweet intonation, the higher pitched intonation in her voice. He cannot hear it, so he thinks she's nagging him all the time, and she's going very frustrated because of all the arguments that they're having. So you can see how Jane is very different from Franco, and yet they're both very motivated. But then you have someone like Brian or Bob. Brian is an Army veteran, and hearing loss is the #1 disability of veterans. Or you have Bob. Bob's a construction worker, always around large machines, And, so the noise level is high. So after, 20 years, he's suffering from hearing loss. And I don't mean to be sexist here by saying he or she, it could be he or she. And so you can see that these people, they know they have hearing loss. They acknowledge it. They're just trying to learn about what it means for them, how soon they need to act, how much do hearing aids cost, what are the advantages, like which model is better, what are the technical features. So there's this whole learning journey that they need to go through, right? Or then you have someone like Allison that has tinnitus, which is ringing in the ear, and the hearing aid will not fix that, not always. Or you have David, who is someone who has hearing loss, and yet he will not admit it. In fact, he has driven his friends crazy, and his friends no longer invite him out because he can't, they're always repeating stuff to him, and he's just in denial. So as a marketer, I can say, well, look, Franco and Jane are very attractive prospects because they're very motivated. Brian and Bob are attractive, but it's going to take a little bit more education to get them through that learning journey, more content. So it's going to take a greater marketing effort to reach Brian and Bob. And then Allison and David is going to be very difficult. In fact, it's a startup, and I'm not going to spend time trying to convince David that he has hearing loss when there are these other personas that are more interesting and more ready to act. I'm just taking a pause to read through the comments to make sure I'm following along. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so what's really important for you is to start to build and name your personas. I guarantee you have at least 3 different types of customers, existing customers, or 3 types of prospects, probably more. If you think you're only selling to one type of person, I would challenge you, and I would say that's not true. So it really requires you to sit down and start to map this out. You can do this the old school way. Here's a template that you can use. It says, one corner here says persona, identity, demographics, what's their age, gender, etc. What is their personality like? What are their interests? Like, what are they interested in? What's a day in the life look like for them? And once you know, like, the day in the life, you'll start to understand what are their challenges and their pain points. Often these are good marketing angles to understand what the challenges are and to start to address those. How tech savvy are they? And why would they buy from us? Why would they buy my art, right? So you can just do it old school with post-it notes. You can do this on a sheet of paper, or you can use a software called Miro.com. They have a free level where you can create a board or 2 for free. And so I encourage you to go through this exercise. Spend some time this week thinking about who your different personas are that you're trying to market to. And there should be some notable differences between them. And not just differences in age and gender where they live, but differences in behavior. Next. And so then once you understand who your personas are, who do you target? Now, what's important in that is to have people that you can find online. So these people need to be findable. They need to be profitable. So you can make, you're not going to spend too much time, effort, money marketing to them at a loss, right? So they need to be profitable, and they need to be actionable. So you need to be able to take action. And so who knows about SMART objectives? You can put into the comment box what SMART means. Okay. So I'm not going to hold you in suspense. Also, I'm going to be here waiting for you all. So SMART means specific. So your objective needs to be specific, measurable. Okay, Eduardo, thank you. It's fantastic. Specific, measurable, reasonable. So the R stands for relevant. So reasonable, relevant. Actionable, yes. So actionable is actually on the slide. So smart, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. Fantastic. Thank you. These are SMART objectives. So generally, when you have business objectives, you want to have SMART objectives. And this includes when you're creating your personas, the ones you target are the ones that you can create clear objectives around. You may have some personas that could be prospects or customers, but they're not attractive enough to target. For example, Dave, who is a person who is in denial of hearing loss, clearly they could be a customer, but it's just going to require too much marketing effort and dollars that probably we would sell to Dave at a loss if he ever did decide to purchase a hearing aid. So it is a persona that exists out there, but it's a persona that we say, no, that is not who we're going to focus on. Next. And so how do you do this? Well, you conduct market research to determine who your personas are. And market research is really an organized effort to collect information about your markets, customers, who were your past customers, present, who are your future customers. If your chart is changing, the type of art you're doing, or your price points are going up, maybe you need to start thinking about who your new customers might be. If your price points are going up, then probably you're going to have to look at different income levels. What are their characteristics and their spending habits? Where are they? What are their needs? So how do you define and find these customers? And this is what you use market research for. It's really used to help determine what to sell to whom, how to communicate, where to communicate, what are trends, what is your pricing strategy, where, if you have a gallery, where it should be located, what events you should be at. So really, lots of stuff to research around your business. Next. And the market research helps you determine the marketing funnel, which is really the buyer's journey. You'll recognize discover, learn, try, buy. Those were kind of the steps in the funnel, right? Awareness, discovery, learning, trying, buying. And here we have it mapped as a journey. So to you, it looks like a funnel. To the person, it's a journey. It's a journey of discovering who you are, learning about you, trying and buying. Trying is not always required because many times there is no trial period. So just discover, learn, buy, or discover, consider, buy. Next. And so what we have in research is primary data versus secondary data. And we have qualitative and quantitative. So let's go through these. Next. So in primary data, this means the collection of data that does not already exist. And so this is data that you feel is you really want to know, but there's no outside source. You have to collect it yourself. And this could be about the underlying reasons, opinions, shared interests of your customers. And you would use open-ended questions like, what are your likes? What are your dislikes? What does a day in your life look like? What are your requirements? What are your emotional motivators? And so this is qualitative primary research that you would conduct with your existing customers or even with your prospects. You would interview people. You can do that through, of course, paper questionnaires, online surveys, through the interview, direct observation of your customers. Or if you go to markets, you can see how customers or prospects are behaving, talking to them, talking to your peers, of course. You go to industry events and you talk to other artists, other photographers, online research, reading focus groups. Okay, next. And then you have quantitative research, which is really about data. And so really this is type of surveys, but really not with open-ended questions. Now you have like multiple choice questions, you have polls. You're trying to rate people on a scale of 1 to 10. You're trying to get actual data about people as opposed to open-ended questions where you could answer anything. Next. And so generally with research, because you are really imposing on people's time, right? They're donating their time to answer your questions. So you really want to be very specific. Short questions to the point. You want to be considerate about their time. You really want to distill what is it that you need to know, to have these questions in mind when you go out to meet your customers. Always have the top 2 questions in mind. So you're always gathering in fact, you're always conducting primary research as you're talking to your prospects and customers to understand them better and to be able to understand who the different personas are, right? And you want it to be personalized, of interest to the respondent. So you have to adapt to them so that they're interested in answering your question. If you're sending it out, no more than 2 pages. People's time is precious. And people always love to answer questionnaires when there's some kind of incentive, 10% off, free t-shirt, free whatever you can use to motivate people to answer. Of course, if you're mailing it out, you need to give them a way to, postage paid, SASE, to send back their answers. Or better yet, use social media, engage people online through your posts, or then through direct messages with people, or maybe in WhatsApp, or however it is that you can get in touch with your prospects. Next. The pros of primary research is that you can get custom insights that don't exist already out there. There's a customer satisfaction. Your customer feels valued, that you're asking them questions, especially if there's something in it for them, like an additional discount on their next purchase. And you can then compare between people and understand your customers better. Of course, the cons are that it's resource intensive. It requires your time and effort. It can be expensive to do primary research, especially expensive in time, but time is money. And you might get low response rate, especially if you're not offering some kind of incentive. People really are saying, well, why should I fill out this 4-page survey? For what? I don't get anything out of it. Next. Secondary research is research that has already been conducted. It's out there, it's publicly available, usually for free, sometimes for cost. Where can you find it? Trade associations, colleges, chambers of commerce, banks, real estate companies, all kinds of different companies and industries and associations are doing research. Many times chambers do research for their own members or of their own membership. And they make this available to their members and sometimes to non-members. Libraries, books out there, magazines. So like government resources like SCORE and Small Business Development Corporation. There's all kinds of online resources as well that have data that already exists and that you can find. Next. One place where you can find data is on Facebook itself. If you create a business account on Facebook for free, you go to business.facebook.com and you can create your business account. Then you'll have access to the Facebook Audience Insights tool. What's interesting about this is that, 2.5 billion people in the world are on it, but also most Americans are on it. I forget the penetration of Facebook in the US. I think it's well over 80%. So, 300 million Americans, over 80% of them have a Facebook account. I believe that's the number. I might be wrong. But anyway, massive amounts of Americans are on Facebook, which means that you can go into this Facebook Audience Insights tool and put in the demographics, like the age, the gender. You can put the location, like West Palm Beach or Miami or whatever. You can put their interests, people that like photography, people that like art, people that like tacos, people that like cars. You can have industries. And as you do that, you start to learn more about them. Not only do you get the percentages that are on Facebook, but you also see like what other pages do they like. You start to glean a lot of insights about these people. Of course, once you know what pages, like let's say you said, well, this is what my customer looks like. They're 25 to 45 years old, a woman in South Florida, and they like photography. Facebook is going to tell you how many of that kind of people there are. And then you see, well, what other pages do they like? And then you go to those pages to see, well, why and how are those pages interacting with your customer segment, right? Next. Now, markets are relationships. People like to do business with people they like. And relationships are all about conversations. And think about when you go to a dinner party, you don't go to a dinner party and start handing out your business card, at least not initially. If you did that, they'd probably kick you out of the dinner party. I've actually seen people do this at networking events. They don't even know your name, but they're already like pulling out their business card, giving it to you. And so you would not do that at a dinner party. And social media is like one big dinner party. And what happens when you go to a dinner party is you sit down, you introduce yourself, you start to know who everyone else is, you start talking to someone or to the group, you start listening first before you start talking. Because what are people talking about? Like, you're not just going to go in, you just arrived, everyone's sitting, and you're going to start talking about yourself. We know people who do that. People generally don't like people who do that. Generally, you want to start listening, and then you find a place to jump in the conversation, right? So that's the same thing on social media. Next. What are people discussing online? But not just like in general, what are people discussing, but what are your customers or what are your colleagues discussing online? Who is doing the talking? Who is influential in this community? Is the content accurate? What are people passionate about? Can you identify relationships in the community? And are they meeting up? Are they meeting up offline? Well, right now with COVID, they probably aren't. So are they meeting up online? Are there WhatsApp groups of people? Or are there like a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group? Or where are people meeting? Are there Zoom webinars going on or like a happy hour? Where are the communities? Can you identify them? This is all about listening. This is the type of market research. It's getting online, finding who your customers are, finding them, finding your peers and your colleagues, listening to the conversation, and then jumping in. Next. And so there are many tools to help you do that. TweetDeck is free. It's on Twitter bot, TweetDeck, so it's for free. And this is really helpful for following hashtags on Twitter, mentions of you, different social media accounts. Google Alerts is a way for you to be alerted whenever someone mentions you in their blog or writes about you. Hootsuite is a social media management tool, and you can have like Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and I think Facebook, different ones. HubSpot is another one. There's also Buffer, BuzzSumo, so all of these generally have a free level of usage and then a paid level if you want premium features or you follow more accounts, etc. But generally with all of these or with most of these, you can start using them for free. Again, it's that trial period in their service. Now you became aware of them. You're going to learn more about them, and then you can try their service for free. TweetDeck is for free, but the other ones have, and Google Alerts is also free, but the other ones here have a free and a paid level. Next. So the pros of secondary research is that it's economical or free, and it's immediately available. You don't have to spend time doing that research. It's already been done for you. You just have to acquire it. The con is, well, where is this research? You have to find it. You have to analyze different sets of data, which might not be in the format that you wanted. Like if you had conducted the research yourself, you would have done it differently. But the chamber did it this way, and so you have to kind of understand what their methodology was. And so it's not really custom to your needs or unique, but it does help you understand better, understand the world better, right? Next. So I suspect, like most of you, I grew up in the age of broadcast media, which I suspect is the same as most of you. Next. And what this means is broadcast media was all about professionals with degrees. And I think you will recognize Superman there, Clark Kent. And he was a reporter, and he was writing to space limitations. And there was an angry editor, and now mixing comics. That's Peter Parker's Spider-Man's editor, always very angry. I forget his name. And then you have a complex publishing process. You're writing or publishing to time constraints and deadlines. You know, the story needs to be in by 2 a.m. for it to be published in time for the morning. You have demographic targeting. And so you had all these constraints with broadcast media. Next. And it's all done by committee. Any type of thing that is broadcast is done. You know, whether it's marketing, public relations, journalism, communications. There's always an editor. There's always a committee. A PR statement that goes out. There's the public relations thing that goes out to journalists. The CEO has a quote in there. Well, the CEO never said that, right? It was a committee of 5 people that determined it. You know, the next day the CEO reads the paper and there's the article, and in the article there's a quote, and he reads the quote for the first time and says, "Oh my God, I said that, I'm brilliant," right? No, it's because a committee of 5 people figured out that the CEO would say something like this about the company or the product or the merger, whatever, and now it is in the paper, and we all think the CEO said it. The CEO never said it, right? So management by committee leads to, next, Photoshopped advertising. I guarantee you there's no single Jeep grill out there that looks like a cityscape, but here it is on a billboard. Of course, it's compelling, it draws your attention, and you're like, oh, okay, well, Jeeps can be driven in the city as well. We get it, but it's a lie. You know, Cindy Crawford, who was a top model when I was growing up, she said, "I wish I looked like the women on the magazine covers, but I don't look like that. I was always photoshopped. In every single photo that was taken of me, that was published, I was photoshopped in some way. So it was all a lie," right? Next. So kudos to her for saying that. Next. It's also interruption marketing. You're watching your favorite TV show, and right when it gets good, it gets juicy, like something's going to happen, boom, there's a commercial. And you're like, what? And it's going to go on for 5 minutes. And so you go to the fridge, you get your sandwich, you prepare your sandwich. The commercial is louder than the TV show you're listening to because they know you're not in front of the TV, so they have to make it louder. It interrupted your show, right? And we grew used to it. Next. And so advertising just turns up the volume and shoves crafted messages at us. Next. Marketers are always pitching their products and services at us, right? Next. It's just spam. So broadcast media was just spam, basically. Next. If you talk to people the way advertising talk to people, they punch you in the face, right? No one enjoys that. So this cartoon is made by a friend of mine, Hugh McLeod. His Twitter is Gaping Void. He makes really good points in his cartoons. Next. So instead of advertising and shoving messages in people's faces, what we have are conversations. And conversations are relationships. And relationships are all about storytelling. In fact, social media is all about storytelling. Next. And when we use social media, it's not what the software does, it's what the user does. And I think this is part of the intimidating factor of any of these online technologies. We get intimidated by what button does what, and what should I do, and how do I do this? And the fact is, it's changing all the time. Just like cars, every year's next model of the car has like 3 more buttons on it, 3 more features. I remember how surprised I was when I stepped into a friend's Mercedes and it started raining and the windshield wipers started going, automatically. And I'm like, wow, how did your car do that? And they're like, well, the car has a sensor now and it knows when it's raining. And I'm like, that blew my mind for some reason. So, social media is the same way. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, there's always going to be new features, new buttons. And so it's not really about that. It's about what you do on the software. It's not what the software can do, but it's about you and how you behave on that software, on that platform. Next. And so as opposed to professionals with degrees, what we have now is amateurs with time, but they're amateurs. They're really into that topic, whatever topic it is. And so they're as good as professionals because they're doing it out of passion. So they're spending all their free, it's like a hobby for them, whatever it is, like photography. You have amateur photographers, they're not professionals, but they're really into it. So they're buying the equipment and they're spending the time and they're taking online courses and they're learning and they're taking lots of photos. You know, and at some point they may become professional photographers, right? Because they have such a passion for it. No space limitations, self-editing, no deadlines. You can blog or do a YouTube video at 4 o'clock in the morning. No one edited you. It's all about sharing and participating, being authentic, telling your authentic stories. Next. So the question then is, what is, yeah, Sarah, Hugh McLeod. Yeah, I've known Hugh for a number of years, back from when I used to live in Europe. I used to live in Paris. I met him back then, and then he moved to Miami, spent a number of years in Miami, and now he's up in North Carolina, North or South Carolina. So what's your online objective? And so, of course, we want to earn income, and we believe that we can earn income by being present online, but it's not enough to be present online. You need to go through all these motions, which means, okay, you've opened up your Facebook page and you have your Twitter account, you have your Instagram account. So what? You need to establish credibility, right? So you need to start posting, and through the things you post, you start to establish some credibility with people. You start to establish an identity. I can identify who you are. For example, you have a LinkedIn bio, and people have, vouched for you on LinkedIn. They've put a recommendation, testimonial. So now other people with LinkedIn profiles have vouched for you. So I know that you exist, you're real, you have an identity, you have credibility. And then based on how you behave online, you establish your reputation. Are you friendly online? Are you helping people with their questions? Or are you just posting and then people comment and you don't even come back to like what they've commented? You don't even reply to their comments. You're not helping them. They ask you a question on your Facebook post. You never came back to help. Other people see that. Other people see that someone posted a question and you never came back to answer that question, right? So what does that say about you, right? Because other people are watching. Your other prospects are watching. And so if you do go back and you answer those questions, you get a reputation as someone who's helpful, someone who's helping other people out. Or are you out on social media also commenting on other people's pages and helping people out on their posts and their comments and your peers? Are you social? You know, when you comment on someone else's post, then other people see you and they're like, oh, that was a really good comment. That's really interesting. Let me check this person out, right? And as you do that, as you develop that, you're developing your footprint online. And this is when you start to have authority, because people start to understand, oh, you really know what you're talking about. You really know a lot about photography or about art, or you really know about these techniques, right? Through the knowledge that you're giving people, right? And so someone became aware of you and is learning through your posts and comments and your presence online. So you're taking them through that learning journey, and then you start to have influence, right? Next. And so what happens in an internet minute? So an internet minute is what happens online in a single minute. These numbers are mind-blowing. Like in a single minute, 19 million text messages are sent, 4.7 million YouTube videos are viewed, nearly 200,000 people tweeted something. So just in the time it's taking me to go over this single slide, all of this is happening. But like all of this at the same time. So even one of these, like 1.6 million swipes have happened on Tinder, left or right, right? But not only that, 190 million emails were sent. Like all of this, and it's all happening at the same time. And it just, I probably just spoke for a minute. All of that just happened, right? So the amount of information that's happening, the amount of sharing and content is just mind-boggling. I think we just can't even wrap our minds around how massive it is. Next. And so digital marketing really is about understanding what the buyer wants, and then understanding what you want, and to be in that sweet spot where you're meeting the buyer's expectation with your information, so that you're teaching the buyer and cutting through all of that other content that's happening at the same time. All those millions and billions of content pieces that are being published at the same time as you are trying to meet your buyer's information needs online. And you do that through content. Next. And you do that through visual content. And this is really where you have a leg up on almost any other person on social media, is that you are artists. So you have that visual perspective. I think most art is visual. And so you have a visual aesthetic understanding of things. You know how to communicate visually. And 90% of communication to the brain is visual. Like even when we're reading text, that's a visual medium. We're reading it, right? So it's visual. So 90% of information is visual. I guess the other 10% is other senses like taste or touch or hearing. Those are not visual. So that's the other ways our brain understands the world. And brains process visuals 60,000 times faster than text. When you see something, when you see a lion, you can understand that much quicker than if you were to read the word lion. Like it just happens much quicker. And it makes sense. We were born to understand that a lion is a threat or a snake is a threat, right? And so our brain processes that instantly, but also everything else that we see in the world, we recognize instantly without even have to say what that word is, right? And so people respond better to visual information than to plain text. Next. But also people respond better to storytelling. There's a superiority in storytelling. And there was research done that showed that 92% of consumers want brands to make their ads feel like stories, but not just their ads, just everything is about storytelling, right? And that's how you connect best with people, is when you tell stories. Next. So a cave was discovered some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, in France, and it's called the Bernie Kel Cave. And this was dated to about 175,000 years ago. Right? They did the carbon dating and figured out, wow, this is one of the oldest traces of humankind is in this cave. And this is time of Neanderthals. So of course, we don't know when humanoids started talking, but what's incredible about this cave is that these stalagmites are like the rocks that grow up in a cave rather than stalactites which come down. These stalagmites were like intentionally broken and arranged in a circle. They cleared out the middle, they arranged the stalagmites in a circle. So you can imagine they were sitting in a circle around each other. They may have had fire and they were interacting with each other. So, probably with language, right? So they were probably talking to each other. And what were they saying? They were probably saying some stories, stories like perhaps when you run out to the river, to the right, there's a big boulder, be careful, there's a rock behind it. In fact, our dear friend, what's a good name? Caveman name for someone, Brian, perished. The bear attacked him. He didn't make it. So I'm telling you, be careful when you go out there. There's a bear, right? And that helped us survive. Now, I think it's a misconception to think that cavemen or cave people were any less intelligent than we are. They were just as intelligent. I mean, their IQs were just like ours, except that the world was very different. It was not a technological world. So their intelligence was expressed in a different way. But there's no reason to believe they didn't have language, and that in the language, they were telling each other stories, and the stories helped them survive a dangerous and complex world. There's so much sensory information in the world, how do you make sense of it? Next. And look, 175,000 years later, nothing has changed, right? We're still telling stories, there's a campfire, and we're still telling stories to each other. Probably hear some scary stories, and no one's going to sleep because of the scary stories that are being said. Next. Because stories connect the dots. So stories take the sensory information that's out there in the world, and they put them into chronological order, and there's an emotional charge to those stories, right? And the emotion around the stories help us pay attention. Things that we fear is important. So the emotion of fear says, okay, that was dangerous, that the neighbor's dangerous neighborhood. Let me be careful when I go there, right? So that emotion is telling you to pay attention to certain information, or what you love, what makes you feel happy and joyous, what inspires you. These emotions are attached to stories, and it helps you navigate a complex world. Next. And so we're all storytellers, because even if we think, and you're all creative, you're all into the arts, and you're all producing arts, and you're all telling a story through the art that you produce. So you know that everybody is creative. Everybody has a story to tell. Everybody is always telling themselves a story about themselves, right? So I have a story about myself in the world. Who am I and what am I trying to do? But I also have a story about my family, about my colleagues, about my friends, right? So there's a story going on about everything, right? So everybody is a storyteller. Many times the story is a wrong story. It's a false story we tell ourselves, and yet we believe it, right? So, so your content and your digital marketing should attract and engage the target buyer. And the way you do it is through storytelling, a storytelling that has emotion. That's really how you're going to attract and engage someone, is by capturing the emotion, right? And then you want to convert them from a buyer to a prospect along the journey. So every time you publish something, you think about what is that next piece of content that you want them to get to, right? So how do you move them along their journey of discovering you, to learning more about you, to buying from you? So that means that every single piece of content has a certain purpose behind it. And this is how professional social media is different than personal social media, is that with professional social media, you're trying to attract and engage buyers and move them along that journey or that marketing funnel towards purchase. Next. And so as people go through that funnel, during the buying, the buying cycle, so this is the buying cycle, the customer journey, the marketing funnel is the buying cycle. And so they're at a certain stage in that buying cycle. They have knowledge requirements. And so you're going to create a narrative to meet their knowledge requirements and to move them along. And this highlights the importance of knowing who you're talking to and where they are in that journey, right? And so if I'm talking to an experienced hearing aid user, I'm not going to try to make them aware of hearing loss, or I may not even have to make them aware of different hearing aid features. They already know that, right? So they just need to know more about my model and my pricing and financing, right? And that is a very different type of knowledge requirement than someone who's just finding out about their own hearing loss, right? And so I need to understand who I'm talking to and where they are in that marketing funnel, the buyer's journey. Next. And you have three ways to do this. One is social media, which is where you're listening to people, you're listening to a conversation, you're understanding what's going on, you're engaging with them. You have, and I didn't need to make that bold. I see the display advertising is bold, but I didn't need to make that bold. You have advertising, so it's paid media or performance media. Performance media because you're paying for that media to perform, and you can measure the clicks and the views on that media. And so beyond just posting something, you're actually paying for that post to have greater reach, or you're creating an advertising to have greater reach, reach beyond your current community of customers. You're trying to reach the greater universe of people who look like that. Or you're capturing prospects' expressed interest. Someone is looking for, portrait photography in Miami. They're going to actually put that into Google search. Who pops up when they put that into Google search? Does your website, if you're a photographer, does that pop up? Portrait photography in Miami, does it pop up? If you have a website, will people find you with that? If that's an important search term for you, if that's your business, doing portrait photography, and someone looks for it, does your website show up on the first page of Google? It makes a massive difference to your income, whether you show up on the first page of Google or on the second or third page, right? And so you're capturing people's expressed interest about that topic by showing up top of the search rankings. So people click on your website and then they get into your marketing funnel. And all of these approaches complement each other. Next. Cheryl, thank you so much for your comment and compliment. So this means that people are not living on your website. In fact, they don't even know about your website. People are out there on Facebook and on YouTube and on Twitter and wherever it is that they are, TikTok, wherever it is, right? So they're out there. And so this means you need to publish out there. Well, where it makes sense, it makes sense to publish where your customers are. But, it doesn't make sense. Like if you figure out, well, yeah, my customers are on TikTok, but I hate video. I don't. So then it doesn't make sense for you to do that, right? Either you hire someone to do that, or you say, well, yeah, people are on TikTok, but I don't like creating these short form videos. I don't feel comfortable in front of videos, so I'm not going to do TikTok. I'll find them on Instagram or on Facebook or somewhere else because I am more comfortable. Or I'll just create a blog because I'm comfortable doing my blog. So really, there's a marriage between where are people, but also what are you comfortable with? Because if you're not comfortable on a certain social media, then you're not going to be authentic. Your discomfort or your fear is going to show through, and you're not going to have an impact. But anyway, it does make you think that, yeah, I do need to be present or post on these different places. And when I do a LinkedIn post or a blog post or YouTube video, what is the next step that I want people to take? So from my LinkedIn post, I want people to come to my YouTube video, and then from there to my online gallery, for example. And so this buyer's journey is messy because people are jumping from social network to social network, from content piece to content piece, as they learn more, become aware of you, learn more about you, and finally end up wherever it is that it is. Is it on your Shopify site, your Facebook, your blog post? Do they call you? Whatever it is. Next. Yeah, for visual artists, Instagram is super engaging, and Instagram has been a very top social network right now. So it makes total sense for artists to be on Instagram, for sure. So you then need to think about what are the touch points that people go through when they're interacting with your own company and your brand. And if you're new to this, then you might look at your competitors. What are the touch points people go through when they're buying from your competitors? How did your competitors set up their business? And you can then learn from that, and you can replicate what they're doing. Or you can say, well, I like those three things, but I don't like that. I'm going to do that differently. So, we're all standing on the shoulders of greatness. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. This is how progress is made in humanity. Scientific progress, there were brilliant people before, and the new brilliant discoveries relied on, like a lot of stuff, scientific stuff relied on Isaac Newton. Or, there's new art that came out, and new artists then are building on that, like whether it was Picasso or Dali or the Impressionists. They broke new ground. They allowed people to see the world in a new way, and then new artists were inspired to build on that, right? Same thing with business. If there's someone who's crushing it, who's killing it out there, then you say, wow, man, that person is doing it really well. Let me learn from that person, and let me see how I can adapt my own marketing based on what they're doing. Does not mean you're stealing what they're doing, but you're looking at what is the best practice out there, and you're going to implement that for yourself. Next. And so that means that when you figure out the touch points, you can then start to create themes, for example. So you do a calendar and you figure out what are the themes that I want to post around. And this is from the hearing aid company, but you could do that for your art. Of course, themes can be seasonal. So, you know, around the major holidays, you might theme your marketing around that. A lot of art is gifted during holidays. So you might want to be able to communicate around those holidays and, you know, make people discover your art as a gift to others, right? And so you can create themes. Next. And then what's here on the left column, it says assets. So for each of those themes and months, you're going to figure out what content assets do you need to create. Do you need to create a YouTube video highlighting your creations? Or is it going to be some kind of blog post? Is it going to be a series of Instagram posts that you're going to make around that theme at that time? Right? So you can plan all of this content ahead of time so that you know what you need to post and communicate at those times. Next. And then from that, you can create your editorial calendar, right? So you're going to know exactly when to publish what. When you know this, this also can drive your email marketing, because then you're going to say, okay, well, then I have the holiday theme. I'm going to send out an email campaign. Plus, I'm going to have these Instagram posts. I'm going to do these 2 YouTube videos. And, you know, I might do something else, right? And so that starts to fill out your calendar. And then in between these campaigns, which might be seasonal or they're just themed out the way you are, in between these major types of communication you're doing, you fill out the gaps in between with other types of content. It could be related content, or it could be more storytelling type of content about you, your business, what you're learning, what your challenges are. Next. So here's another way of drawing the customer journey. And here you'll see the journey is mapped out on top: discovery, research, purchase, delivery. So that's the stages that this company has identified for their customers. Their customers go through these stages in their journey. And what are the touch points? Here we have television, in-store, online, email, scheduling a face-to-face, and then word of mouth. And at the bottom, you see they've even mapped out the customer's emotion as the customer interacts with each of these touch points along their customer journey. And that also indicates where they can improve the process, the journey. So there's two frowny faces around the delivery and after-sales support, especially with the online and the email around that. So now this company knows that they need to improve this part of the customer's journey because customers are having an awful experience. So it's really, you can see how valuable it is to map out the customer's journey, because you can then start to measure and see what's happening. Next. And here is yet another way, and this looks a little bit more complicated, but it really isn't. As you start mapping it out, you start layering in new things, and then you're going to be drawing maps like this. Really, a simplified version of this map really shows that, you know, the customer came in through social media, they landed on the website, and they formed out a form on the website where they gave their name and email address, and then they received an email sequence from us. So that was the customer journey, right, that is mapped out here. That is one of the journeys that's mapped here. There's another one which involves a call center. There's another one that involves not social media, but paid advertising. There's yet another journey here that's mapped here that is other like press, like the press talking about us, right? And that's yet another journey. That's all mapped out on this graphic. So of course you don't have to, you know, read this, but just conceptually you can see how you can map this out for your own customers. I know it looks complicated, but you can start out very simply and then start to build on it. Next slide. And so, for example, here on Facebook is a Facebook lead ad, right? So on Facebook, you can create an advertising for as low as $50 or $20 or $30. You can reach thousands of people with your ad, it's a video ad, short 15-second video ad that then people click on, and then there's going to be a form, that people then fill out. Usually on Facebook, it's pre-filled. They submit it, and when they submit it, they get an automatic series of emails that you've set up in MailChimp for them. So here is a customer journey that you've planned out on Facebook for your personas, which means you can target your personas specifically by location, gender, behavior. You put an ad, they click on it, they gave you their email address, and now you can then convert them to a customer. Yeah, so these are ideas, but these are also best practices, and these apply to all industries, including artists. And you can do the same things that I'm talking about here. I'm using hearing aids as a company. By, a little bit more about myself. I am an amateur photographer. I don't sell my photography, but I am passionate about it, especially landscape photography, especially South Florida sunrises. So that is my approach to art. I do write some poetry as well, but I don't publish this stuff. Sometimes I publish it online. But I understand that you might think that this is different for artists. It really isn't. If you're selling anything, if there are dollar signs attached to what you produce, then you are in a business sales cycle. Like it or not, money exists in the world, and to live and to pay your rent, you need to earn money, right? And so you need to sell something to earn money, and you're selling your art. And so this is how stuff gets sold online. It's about content marketing. It's about making people aware of you and what you produce, having people learn more about you, who you are, what your art is about, how you create your art, the techniques you're using. There's so much content around what you do, and so many ways to bring people in to learn more about what you do, why you do it, who you are, and then eventually to purchase. And so you probably are going to have a Facebook page and a website and an Instagram account, and you're taking people through these processes on. Now, you may not know that you're doing it, but the best practice is to do this intentionally and to map it out, to understand who are your personas, what are their information needs, and how can you meet those needs in order for them to go from prospect to customer. Next. Part of that is the irresistible offer. What are you offering your prospects? That they have to be an idiot not to claim this. Is it like a lesson? Is it a class? Is it, you're showing people how you do your art? Is it some kind of free sample, a free course? If you're a professional photographer, can you give a free course to people? If it makes sense to just kind of bring them in to your way of thinking, your way of doing things, without giving away your trade secrets, right? What is it that people would have to be an idiot? So there's a poet called David White, who I recently discovered. I find his poetry to be extraordinary. But not only that, the way he talks about his poetry is just magnificent, because he goes really deeply into why he wrote that poetry the way he did and what it means. And it's just magnificent. And now I'm participating in he has a series of 3 Sundays. So for 3 Sundays in a row, 1 hour at a time, he is talking about his poetry. And it really is about the Pilgrims Journey. I find this concept so fascinating, that we have a journey here on Earth. We embodied this body on Earth, and we're going through some kind of experience on this planet. What is this experience? What is this Pilgrim's Journey? Who are these strangers that we meet along our journey? And who is a stranger that's in ourselves, that's always becoming? We're always becoming someone else. And he charges for these 3 Sundays, right? I find it extraordinary. I'm inspired, I'm motivated to think about greater things, right? His irresistible offer was, you don't need to buy my book or anything, but I have these 3 Sundays where I will be on Zoom talking to you and about how I create my poetry and why and what does it mean. It's amazing, right? Next. So there's software to help you draw these diagrams. Of course, you can do it the old school way and doing on a chart, or you can do it using this free tool called draw.io, and you can start to chart things out. It looks technical. If it's not your bag of chips, I understand, but I'm just presenting this as an option. Next. Miro also does that. So they have this customer journey map, maybe easier to use than the previous one, draw.io. And you can also create a customer journey in here. Next. So we've really gone from traditional marketing, which is all about that that marketing funnel where you're trying to find people, convert, keep, into storytelling, where you're also now storytelling to your existing customers that you already have. So that's up here where it says find. So it's like an inverse pyramid where you're starting with your existing community and you're getting them to know more about yourself, and they then become your ambassadors and create the word of mouth for you. Next. So this really shows that you go from finding people, which is really a very important marketing activity that you need to do, is that marketing funnel. But once you have your customers, you've engaged them in the storytelling and you're going to keep them. So now that I know about David Whyte, I've read his poetry, now I've seen him on Zoom, he's been presenting amazing concepts. Look what's happened. Now I'm telling all of you, I don't know how many of you there are, but I've just told you about David Whyte. And some of you may go to look up his poetry. So what just happened? I became an ambassador for David Whyte. He didn't even ask me to. I don't even know him personally, but I was so inspired by what he does that here I am talking about him to all of you, right? So I'm doing this word of mouth kind of referral for him, even though I get nothing out of it. Next. And so let's get into this best type of storytelling, which is the making of. Next. So what we're seeing here is the finished product. This could be like an advertising, it's a finished product. It's photoshopped. It's not real. This has been enhanced in many different ways. Next. This is the making of. This is kind of like the B-roll. This is like kind of like what happened behind the scenes. This is the story of the making of a photo, right? You went to see Jurassic Park, maybe, or any one of these incredible blockbuster movies, and you're like blown away. And then you come home, you turn on the TV, and there is the same actor or actress talking about how they made Jurassic Park and how they had to run through a field pretending there was a big dinosaur. There was no big dinosaur. It was put in through CGI later, and you're learning all about this and how they did it. And that is the making of Jurassic Park or the movie. Social media is the making of you, your business, your company. What is it that you're going through on a day-to-day basis? What are the highlights? What are your challenges? What are your dreams? For example, you have a pet, you have a dog, you took the dog out for a walk in the park, you took a picture of it, you posted that to Facebook. All of a sudden, you got all this engagement. You had been posting other things, stuff about your art. No one was engaging, but then you put the dog, and everybody loved it, asked you all kinds of questions about the dog. What's the name? What kind of breed, etc. And you're like, wow, people engage. Why? But yeah, of course, because there's emotion attached to it. You show the side of yourself. You show that you're a dog lover. You have a dog. People connected emotionally with that. They said, wow, what an interesting person. You showed some personality, some character. Let me pay more attention to your art now because I see you're a dog lover like myself. That's just an example. It could be something else. It could be some challenge you're going through, perhaps not be too personal about that, but maybe you're going through something, or maybe you have a dream or something. Talk about that stuff because that's the making of you. And that's how people connect emotionally with you. Next. It's really, we're all on this hero's journey, this pilgrim's journey. Joseph Campbell was an anthropologist and psychologist, extraordinary a person, he studied all of the world's mythologies and religions, and he figured out, there are these types of stories that are being told, and one of the, the best story that's told across religions and mythologies and movies is this hero's journey. You'll see there's a hero's journey in Star Wars, in The Lord of the Rings, in Avatar, in Titanic. They all have a hero's journey where there's a call to adventure, and then there's a mentor that comes in to give some guidance, and then everything is lost. The Hobbit loses the ring. Looks like everything is going to be lost, catastrophe. But then the Hobbit Luke Skywalker has some kind of epiphany, learns something. The Jedi Master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, taught him something and he had an epiphany. Or usually he learns, or he or she learns this on their own. And there's like a rebirth. And then they fulfill their mission, and they come back to the village, and they look the same, but they're a changed person inside. They're wiser. They have more experience. They come back different. And this is the hero's journey. And we all have this hero's journey on this planet, and with your business, that is your hero's journey as well. You're setting something up. You're doing your art. You're selling it. There's a journey. You have ups and downs. This is an incredible story to tell people online, and this is how you engage them emotionally. Next. And so this is how you create compelling content. You connect through your passions, you pay attention to your customers, you show what's going on, the making of, the B-roll, you interview people, you use outside voices, you get people to be inspired, you ask them big questions, you challenge them to think big, you ask them to be real. You are being real, you're being yourself, you share yourself, your challenges, because people love a good story, people connect with a good story, people connect emotionally, and people like to do business with people they like. Next. And that takes you out of the zone of mediocrity. If you're playing it safe all the time, remember all the content that's being published online, you're not going to break through. You need to be on the edges like Steve Jobs was. People either loved Steve Jobs or hated Steve Jobs. There's no mediocrity with that person. So many people you are paying attention to yourselves are not in that zone of mediocrity. And you know a lot about those people because they're sharing their life story authentically. Next. We're here to be entertained. I mean, what an incredible world, what an incredible life this is. Yes, we're all going through a challenge. COVID-19, lockdowns, quarantines. It's still an incredible experience we're going through. This experience is asking us to go inside, meet our shadows, learn more about ourselves. People, when they go online for entertainment, 88%. So make it fun for people, be authentic, tell your story, and hopefully these tips have helped. And thank you so much. I think we only have a minute for questions. Maybe I spoke too long, but really I appreciate so much. This is my 10th year presenting, and I very much appreciate this opportunity and all of you. And thank you for engaging on the comments.
Wow. Hey, Alex. I think everybody's in agreement. We could probably listen to you for another hour talking on your content. It's so engaging and so intense and wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation. And I want to also remind everybody out there, don't worry. You can rewatch this entire video. You can stop it. You can replay it. You can take multiple notes as much as you need. It's going to be on the Broward Arts Facebook and YouTube page, so you don't have to worry. And I want to thank you, Alex, for your time and all of your knowledge.
Thank you, everybody.
And I want to make sure to let you know, don't go anywhere except for get a refill of coffee maybe, because up next, we are going to be talking about arts and civic engagement, and you're going to want to tune in this one. It's going to be starting at 10:45. See you in a little bit. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's Angela here, and welcome to the second part of Business Skills for the Modern Creator, presented by the Broward County's Cultural Division. We had a morning packed with great information, and you are now ready to get even more great, valuable, and free information just for all of you artists and creatives out there. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going to happen before we get started. Our second presentation is going to explore collaborations and resources around art civic engagement and possible options for collaborations at the local, regional, and the national level with author and educator Dr. Corinna Moebius. So I want to make note, I know in the first part, the presentation did go long, so we didn't have a chance for a Q&A, but for this one, we will. We will be doing a Q&A, so make sure to send either questions along the way, and we'll take note to them, and we'll make sure to talk about that at the end of her presentation. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Moebius now. She is a Little Havana-based writer, educator, and consultant. She helps people shift paradigms within themselves, within institutions, and within communities. She teaches at Florida International University and for decades has worked to make cities and communities more equitable and inclusive. As director of Imagine Miami, Catalyst Miami's Civic Engagement Initiative, she designed South Florida's first summit on arts, culture, and civic engagement. Dr. Moebius is a longtime advocate of Afro-Cuban arts and has organized dozens of performances aimed at educating audiences about these traditions. She holds a PhD in Global and Sociocultural Studies from FIU with graduate certificates in Afro-Latin American Studies and African Diaspora Studies. She holds a certificate in Arts Management from the University of Massachusetts Summer Institute for Arts Management, where she was trained by Barbara Schaefer-Bacon, one of the founders of the Americans for the Arts Animating Democracy Initiative. So, without further ado, we'll let you take this one away.
Thank you so much, Angela, and hello, everybody. I really appreciate to be here with you today. And I hope that all of you had a chance to hear the great presentation by Alex, who's a friend of mine. He has so much good information to share, and that information is relevant to this presentation too. So one thing I want you to think about during this entire presentation is the fact that there are, in this last presentation, you've been thinking a lot about being paid for your work by your clients. But there are funds out there, foundations, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, community groups, and activists, and they are looking for artists like you. And that's another way that you can generate income for yourself. You can get well paid for arts-based civic engagement work. But even if you do it just from the bottom of your heart because you care about a particular cause or social concern, this work offers so many other benefits that can allow you both to support yourself, but also stay in alignment with your values. So I also want you to think about what Alex was saying in terms of your story. This kind of work can be part of your original story. It can be what sets you apart. Next slide, please. So today, I want to explain to you what is arts-based civic engagement, how it can have an impact on communities and societies, and how it can be a source of revenue for you, since funders get very excited by these kinds of projects. And I'm going to give you lots of case studies, lots of examples. I'm going to share tips on how you might want to start your own project. And I'm going to end up by talking about two things that are really vital to this kind of work. And that is avoiding the hero artist syndrome. And this is different than the hero story that Alex was talking about. So I'll explain. And also finding and choosing partners. Okay. So one thing I also want to mention is that I'm not going to have enough time to go into great detail about the planning and design of projects, but there is a URL that's being provided to my website, and by the end of today, because I need a little more time to update it, I'm going to be sharing resources, websites, places where you can get much more detailed information about this kind of work. My goal here is to help you kind of get what arts-based civic engagement is and some of the opportunities around it. So next slide, please. So what is arts-based civic engagement? Well, right now, you might already be involved in this kind of work. So I want to give an opportunity for you to share. If you're working on such a project, please share that in the comments section, and so that we're learning from each other and you're not just learning from me. And next slide, please. So in order to think about what is arts-based civic engagement, we have to think about what is civic engagement. And civic engagement, it really requires that we think about our interconnectedness, that we are part of a larger whole, and that this collective is stronger when we make a difference in society. So what do you have to offer? What talents, what dedication, what knowledge can you bring through your art to help society become more equitable, more inclusive, more ecologically and otherwise resilient and sustainable and more just? Okay, next slide, please. So I define arts-based civic engagement as a creative, collaborative, and participatory process, work, or experience that strengthens the social fabric of communities, nations, and beyond. You can think of it as having an impact across different scales. And as a part of that definition, I want to share a term that I learned from a phenomenal Chicano theater artist, teacher, and community activist, Javier Gomez of Oxnard, California. And it's this term, in la quech. Javier founded and directed a community theater called Teatro en la quech. And in la quech, he said, is a Mayan term that means, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. What I do to you, I do to myself. I think that's a really important concept to think about when you're doing this kind of work. And his theater is a great example itself of arts-based civic engagement. So Javier has worked with people of all ages in the Latino, Latinx community in Ventura County in California, in Southern California. And I mean people from kids to grandparents. And working in collaboration with this local community, he collaborated with them to create plays that were responding to issues of great concern in the community. Like, this was like in the 90s, and what some of those things were gun violence and HIV/AIDS. And then those same community members were actors who performed these plays, and not in your sort of traditional theater venues necessarily, in backyards, at schools, at prisons, and right in the street. So this was theater by, for, and about the people. Okay, so next slide, please. So right now we hear a lot about social distancing because of COVID. And definitely we need to be wearing our masks. So we need to be doing physical distancing. But we're also in a time when our society is very divided, and people are dealing with social isolation and a great deal of growing inequity. And maybe what we need to think about is how arts and your creative spirit can build the social connection, the solidarity, the civic spirit that we need to get through this. So social connection doesn't always have to be face-to-face, but you are creative people, and you can think about how in these circumstances of COVID, can we bring people together in this collective spirit. Next slide, please. So how can the arts do that? And I also want to do a shout out and thank those of you who are sharing some of the work that you're doing. That's fantastic. I hope that there's some way that you can connect with each other too, if you're interested in a collaboration amongst each other. So I would also like to invite you now to think about or put out there how you think the arts can build social connection and a civic spirit. But what I want to emphasize here is that it can help build meaningful connections. And so one of the things that you see in a lot of arts-based civic work is this creating of a space for dialogue versus debate, getting people out of the us versus them, okay, and out of the fear-based lizard brain and into a space for considering possibility. And it's also very powerful. Oops, I'm not in this. I guess I'm going to have to shift over somehow. Let me see. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. But so how you can build relationships sometimes between groups, but also within a group. Sometimes groups are seen by outsiders of that group as sort of homogeneous, okay? So for example, the Cuban community. But what about these differences in a particular community that are not being discussed even within that community, that can be based on social class or arrival to the US, or whether someone was born here or not. So there's all kinds of ways that you can be building these connections through your artwork. And this artwork, secondly, can also help people see things from new perspectives. And in doing so, build empathy. So it helps you reframe stories, reframe narratives, because you're seeing things. Maybe now your community is better able to see bias or inequity and get into a space of reflection. Okay. Third, arts can really cultivate healing and well-being. Communities in crisis, communities going through a collective trauma, what we're dealing with right now, okay, for example, over COVID and also over police violence. How can you cultivate healing, and not just like one individual as a time, as a therapist might do, but you can do this on this broad collective level, and that's very powerful. And then fourth, and I think this is really important, is that as creative people, you can spark people to make change. Your artwork can lead to a change in decisions and policies and practices that are inequitable and that negatively affect people or the planet, okay? So let me just look here at your comments. Great. So somebody's saying, I learn from these kinds of projects. I learn from the communities. That's so essential. And somebody's mentioning every vote 2020. That's a big issue. Visual art exhibition. Great. And that it's about collaboration. Yes, absolutely. So next slide, please. How can you make a difference? Well, you need to think about the next slide. Think about what is the social concern that you care about, that you're passionate about, that you can address. And maybe that is, well, I'll talk about that later, but then what do you bring to bear? What are not only creative talent, but what other kinds of gifts and skills and talents and resources can you bring into this project? And then also critical, as a part of those talents and gifts, what ties do you have with community stakeholders, with the community groups that you want to impact? And then also, what is the more specific need and opportunity here and now or coming down the pike that you can see ahead? And that's another thing I will go into. So let's go to the next slide. So the social concern, that could be broad. It could be sea level rise. It could be the prison industrial complex. It could be voter protection and participation, local economies. But you need to narrow that. So next slide. So you want to think about what is the need and opportunity right now? How are you going to focus it? How are you going to make it timely? And you want to make it simple. You cannot do everything with your project. And that is a big mistake that artists getting into these projects who are new to this kind of work sometimes find themselves in. They're just trying to tackle too much. Keep it simple. So look at what is happening, for example, right now in your own community. Let's say it is sea level rise. How is it affecting maybe even your own neighborhood, okay, or your own city? What is there a new crisis, something that's happening right now? So COVID, it happened. How can you seize that opportunity? Maybe it's something that has just happened, new legislation, a new park has been approved. How can you engage with that? And I mentioned that it's important to think about needs and opportunities coming up in the future. So for example, because of COVID, we know that many industries and jobs are being affected. Many businesses are being affected. Well, what's going to happen? How are people going to re-envision the kind of work that they do if their entire industry is being so severely impacted? And so this is a great opportunity for artists. It's a need, but it's an opportunity. And it's really important to be thinking in the long term, because if you're going to be applying for funding, if you're going to be applying for grants, you need to consider the time to do the proposal, to get the approval, to form those relationships and find your community partners and all that. So it's good to be have that kind of foresight. So as an example of that, I want to go into our first case study. So next slide. So this case study is about artists who have sprung into action in response to COVID. And first I want to mention Bronx artist Eric Orr. So he's a pioneer in graffiti art in the 1970s. And his friend is Gary Lichtenstein, who's a really talented screen printer. And Gary found out that screen printing was considered an essential business because of needing to get information out about COVID. So the two of them were really concerned about the impact of COVID on marginalized communities at high risk. And so they decided to collaborate on making these posters, informational posters to reach these communities. So they connected with a partner. This is very necessary part of this kind of work, is your partner, your community partner. And in this case, it's Urban Pathways, and it's a nonprofit that focuses on moving at-risk and homeless individuals into apartments. And they have apartment buildings throughout the boroughs in New York. So Urban Pathways, when they talk to the staff of Urban Pathways, these are folks working on the front lines with these populations, they were saying that these official notices from the CDC were too hard to read, they were too hard for community members to understand. So in response, Orr and Lichtenstein were creating these really brightly colored posters and neon colors, and they hand printed enough posters for 850 residents in the apartments of Urban Pathways. So do you see how they connected the need and the opportunity? Okay. Now, another example, next slide, please, is the Anti-Sewing Squad. Has anybody heard of the Anti-Sewing Squad? So this was started by a Los Angeles-based performance artist named Christina Wong. And she was concerned about the lack of masks available to folks. So she just started creating these masks in her own living room and posted about it on Facebook. And all of a sudden now you've got, at this point, a national collective, about 800 volunteers of all genders, not just women, and those called aunties, who are sewing masks. And together, they are sharing patterns, fabric, and elastic, getting the resources, getting the materials. Everybody's sort of stepping up as it grows bigger and bigger. And these are masks that are going out nationally. So they have produced 55,000 masks for communities in need. And they're focusing on communities that are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. But what's interesting is that they take it to another level, because Wong doesn't just describe this as, and the other volunteers don't just describe this as, oh, it's an arts project or it's a volunteer project. She says, no, these are our sweatshops. We're turning our living rooms into sweatshops because the federal government is not providing enough personal protective equipment to essential workers in vulnerable communities. So they're making a statement about it, an activist statement about it. At the same time, they're engaging people in the making, in the art making of the masks and fulfilling this larger need. But they've also taken another step. They started donating sewing machines to an organization that helps Navajo and Hopi families with COVID relief. And that organization started sewing masks, and they made 40,000 masks for Navajo families. So they're using Zoom now to teach people how to sew. And now they have a summer camp to teach kids to sew. And they're supported entirely by donations. So this is an example of how you can start small, but it can grow organically. You don't always have to even have the capacity to think of how big something can be. But it starts with that collaboration. And I know in the previous presentation, somebody was talking about Instagram and social media. Those are the ways that you can get this kind of work out. And then people kind of flow to you because they're excited about your work and it touches them. It's meaningful to them. So another example, and this is one of my favorite examples right here in Florida. Next slide, please, is Art to Action. So Art to Action is a Tampa-based nonprofit that has done really amazing work in arts-based civic engagement. And it was envisioned in 2001 by a theater artist named Andrea Asaf. And what they do is they really believe in the possibilities of queerness as a frame for their work, and the necessity, stick with me, with the both and to help clarify what I mean and what they mean by the both / and is, Assad says you can have the most horrific things occurring in the world, all these levels of violence, from domestic violence to violence in communities to violence on the much larger scale of war, okay? But how is there beauty in the world at the same time? So how can we use art to heal and to reframe stories and how we are in the world and how we are with each other, and how we can create a world that has less war and has less violence. So one of their new interdisciplinary arts projects is called Drone. And on the one hand, performers explore the drone, the presence of drones in war zones as this embodied experience of militarization, the surveillance of the drone, or the fact that it can kill you. But at the same time, and this is a really creative part of this, they're incorporating the droning, the musical singing practice of droning in music traditions from Appalachia to Iran. And so through this creative encounter of artists from the US and the Middle East, they're looking at these different ways of even thinking of the drone and thinking about the violent drone, but also these other traditions of droning. So artists think outside the box. That's a talent of creativity. And so again, it's kind of bringing things together that you wouldn't normally think that could coexist with each other. So let me tell you a little bit about Asaf. Her father is Lebanese. Her mother is white European American, but she grew up in a white European household. Okay, then 9/11 arrived, and she was living a block from Union Square in New York City. And so her life changed overnight, and suddenly she realized she was being perceived very differently. Everybody wanted to ask if she was Arab or Muslim, and she said it helped her understand how people can be targeted. overnight, how opinion can shift. And so as a member of this broader Middle Eastern community, she recognized a need. She was a stakeholder in it. But at the same time, she realized that this community is a lot more complex than people imagine. There are many communities that are part of that community, and not everybody is Muslim, for example. And so she was really inspired as an artist to bring members of this larger Middle Eastern community together to be in dialogue with each other so they could hear different perspectives and tell their stories in their own voice. And so the both part that she's talking about, this both and, is that you can be in the same community, in the same neighborhood, in the same city, and yet there are still these differences, these frictions, these tensions that are worthy of hearing out and exploring. So art can bond people together, but it can also bring awareness, okay, about different experiences, perspectives, inequity, different life experiences. So she's also, as an artist, seen the opportunity to push and challenge her community. So she's an openly queer identified artist, and not everybody in this community is very comfortable with her being open about that. So as an artist, you can also, if you're a stakeholder, this can be an opportunity to address these kinds of things that are, again, maybe taboo. There's no other space where it's being talked about. So Assad moved to Tampa. That's where I mentioned she's based now. And in this particular community, she saw an opportunity. Here you have a large community of refugees from the Middle East, but it's also a very large military community with a lot of veterans. So she has also worked not only within the Middle Eastern community, but to bring together these veterans with members in this community of refugees. On theater projects, she has they organize a open mic for veterans. They work not only with local artists, but with local students. They work with artists from other parts of the country, and they even have what they call a cultural organizing aspect of their work. And this is really oriented around impacting policy, okay? So next slide. So you need to think about how your work is affecting community stakeholders. So maybe it's about reaching a community that's affected by a recent event, a crisis, a project that's coming, that's planned, that's going to transform a particular neighborhood in some kind of way. You want to think about the geographic scope of your project, and again, keep it simple. Sometimes, starting really small can be very wise. And then there's these working in a process. Art is so powerful in the process, and not enough people think about this aspect. It's helping people in a process of healing, or in a process of community visioning, or in planning, or how they collectively want to address a particular need in their community. And also, you may want to get to the level of impacting policy or your community partner. And so how are you engaging community leaders, decision makers, elected officials, etc.? Okay. Any questions so far? I'll give you a chance to do that, and I will continue on. So next slide, please. So you have an opportunity here to think about what relationships you already have with these community stakeholders. Maybe you are a stakeholder. You're a member of this group. That's great. I say start there. Because if you have an existing trusted relationship with the community and the group, or the respected leaders and organizations that are a part of it, that's a very, very important part to the success of your project, trust. But also do think about, if you are part of a particular stakeholder group, that it's valuable for you to think about other perspectives. Sometimes you can assume that you know everything about a particular community. And it's important to be thinking about who is not at the table, what other dimensions of this community are we not thinking about, okay? So for example, I live in Little Havana. I've been an activist in Little Havana, and I've had a lot of, there are a lot of folks who love to come to Little Havana who are not from the neighborhood, and they have this vision of what Little Havana is, and they think of it as this very Cuban place. And they do all their work and all their project on a little tiny, what I call the Heritage District or the Touristic District, which is only about 5 blocks. They do a project right there, which is really kind of disconnected in many ways in the rest of the community that's in great need. And it's oftentimes they have this vision of focusing with the Cuban community, but there's so much work that has never been done with the Central American community. So be careful of the assumptions. I'll emphasize this over and over again, the assumptions that you might have about particular communities, even if perhaps you grew up in that community, okay? But I want to give a case study right now. So next slide, please. So Plaza is a dance project, a dance-based project. A dance choreographer, Leone Garcia, he grew up seeing his father work in a produce market. He spent many, many hours of his childhood in the produce market. And his uncle, for many years, has run this produce market in Alapara, which is a neighborhood here in Miami. And he was really upset to discover that a developer had bought the land where this market, this warehouse actually is based. And it's a warehouse that people call, this warehouse area is called La Plaza. And so he said, you know, he wanted to really create this dance choreography to speak to the people who were being displaced by this, especially the workers. Many people were employed by this produce warehouse. And he had an opportunity here, not only his knowledge of the produce market, but this connection with his uncle, who allowed him to do a site-specific work right there in the warehouse. So, and it was also a place where people could kind of process the loss of this place through gentrification. And he wanted it to be a space to think about this, the erasure and the displacement of the broader community as spaces were transforming from more working class to sort of the trendy. So what personal experiences, what connections do you have that could allow you to do something like a site-specific piece? Or, I mean, right now we've got to do things so virtually, but there's other ways that you can tap into these connections in productive ways. So next slide, please. So you want to think about the stage at which you are engaging stakeholders. And I recommend doing so, the earlier the better. The earlier that you engage community stakeholders, the more responsive you can be to genuine community needs. And sometimes you can have a great community partner, but I've witnessed how folks can sometimes, all these artists will work with the same community partner, and that partner may have a great relationship with a particular segment of the community, but not maybe the broader, or not perhaps another segment that nobody's ever working with. So so it's not necessarily just engaging with the partner early in the planning. There are ways that you can engage the broader community that you really want to work with really early in your stage of the project. And maybe that's part of what you're pitching to the funder, is this engagement early in the process. And so think about how in different stages. So for example, the folks that I mentioned who are doing the posters, they were working with their partner and the staff, all the diverse staff, to think through these posters and how they could be effective. Wong was engaging people in the art making experience, so the actual making of what you could say is an artwork. And other times it can be like at an event, for example, a specific moment online or in person. And then sometimes it can be something that has an ongoing impact and dialogue with community members. So that's kind of hard to wrap your head around this. So this is why it's valuable for me to mention more case studies. So next slide, please. So I want to mention Miami Motel Stories. Miami Motel Stories are produced by Juggernaut Theater Company. And these are site-specific, immersive theatrical experiences that take place in hotels and motels. And so they have these little playlets that take place in individual rooms of the hotel. And they give you a window into oftentimes the real life stories of people who stayed at that hotel. Sometimes these were also rooming houses, and so people may have lived there or worked there, and from different time frames of the existence of that building. So this was inspired. Playwright Juan Sanchez, he did this first. He wrote his first play as a part of this series, based on a hotel in Little Havana called the Tower Hotel, which has been around for quite a long time. And he just lives a few blocks from that hotel. And he was sort of wondering what stories were part of the history of this hotel, which in this case too had been a rooming house, and it also been a hospital, been a rooming house for very low income individuals, and it had recently been bought by this developer. So we also wanted to tell the story about Little Havana and Miami, and he wanted to give voice to stories that weren't being told about the community and use the hotel as the space to do that. So one thing I appreciate about this project is that I know for a fact that he was interviewing a lot of community members. He was interviewing all these people who were still living, who had some kind of a connection to the hotel, and he was trying to, and the way he told these stories was to help bring together and bring to light experiences of racism, for example, or experiences of economic struggle, and to make those more visible. But here's something else that he did. So, and that they did collectively as a theater company. So next slide, please. So here you see a local Afro-Cuban dancer, Marisol Blanco. And Marisol Blanco is a local resident. She lives just blocks from this hotel as well. And she does the traditional dances, Afro-Cuban dances of Santeria, the Afro-Cuban religion Santeria. And in this space, the theater goers, after the little playlets, there was this sort of these different spaces in the hotel where there was performances, interactive kinds of experiences, and this connection with actual residents of the neighborhood expressing different cultural forms. And I remember witnessing people who were watching this kind of dance and the drumming that goes along with it for the first time, and they were just amazed. They were awed. They were excited. One person who saw it was like, oh my gosh, I want to hire her. So it was like economic opportunity for people in the community. So creating these sort of spaces for encounter and seeing that there's not in artwork, and it's not, let's say you're doing an art exhibit, or let's say you're doing a play. It's not, sometimes the most creative energy is not during something. It's in that sort of in-between space before and after the seemingly official presentation. So Eduardo is asking about the difference between the second and the third level on the chart. I want to go back. Can we go back a couple slides really quickly, because I wanted to mention that the art making experience is right. The making of the artwork can be, let's say you're preparing the, actually I'll be able to talk about that in a moment related to this particular Miami Motel Stories project. So, so I'll mention that in a second. That can be sort of leading up, the making of the artwork leading up maybe to a particular moment where it's unveiled or it's shared with a broader community. So I'll mention a case study later on of people working collaboratively like Teatro en la Quech, on preparing collaboratively on the play itself, and then the play is performed. Then the experience can be that actual performance and what is happening. And sometimes there are theater performances where it's open-ended and there's actual interaction going on with community members, and what happens in that performance is happening right there in the present. So it's nuanced. But if we can go back to the, go forward in the slides and then go to the next slide. So right here, for example, you see an altar. This altar, the Juan and his fellow people in the theater company reached out to a priest of Santeria because they had a little room that was honoring some of the different spiritual and religious traditions in Little Havana. And it's a strong base for practitioners of Santeria, which is a very misunderstood religion. And so they worked with a Little Havana-based priest to recreate the kind of altar that he has in his own home. And so sometimes what artists can do is that they can expect, or they assume, or they have these sort of stereotypes. And the last thing you want to do is to reproduce stereotypes. So the more you can actually work with community members, in this case, he wasn't necessarily there at every performance. He did go to one, the priest, but he was really excited to be part of being able to share this altar in this kind of a space, and let more people become aware of it and maybe appreciate it. So next slide. So another thing that was going on was I mentioned the connections between the theater goers and the performers, for example. But also there were these experiences that I witnessed between the people who were participating. In this case, Marisol, the dancer, and one of the actors, okay? And so, Eduardo says, yeah, Maya, no, she was dancing Oshun. But here they were, and they made this really fabulous connection. Sometimes when you're engaging a stakeholder group, those folks may not necessarily know each other. So how are you building connections that are sustainable, that can last over time, that can result in some future collaboration, and you're not even there? It just happens organically on its own. So next slide. But actually, sorry, can we go back one slide? I do want to mention something else, though. Miami Motel Stories, though, brings up another issue that you need to consider. I read a New York Times article about Miami Motel Stories, and the critic brought up an important point. And they said that, you know, they noted that these hotels where Miami Motel Stories are taking place are all hotels that have recently been bought by developers and are kind of part of this gentrification of neighborhoods. So yes, your art project can do that great work of sparking connection and building bridges, but is it also being sort of leveraged in a process of displacement of community residents? Does it have perhaps another thing that you may not intend at all that complicates your project? Really think about how your project can advance equity and whose interests are served by your project, okay? How can your artwork move towards strengthening social fabric in deeper and more long-term ways, instead of, and sometimes that means that there is something else that you add into this artwork. Is there a way that you can connect people to an organization, or you can do some other work related to your project that is doing some deeper digging on these other processes, like, in this case, gentrification? So next slide, please. Some of you may have heard of J.R. Artist. J.R. Artist is a French artist. He did this famous work called Border Art at the border wall between Mexico and the U.S. And you might think that maybe that's his big thing, is social causes, immigration. It's not. His impulse is to be in sort of conflict zones, sometimes war zones, places where there's tensions, but how do you bring people together? How do you help people see things in new ways? That's what motivates him. So he had learned about the border wall, and he actually had a dream of a child, an infant, looking over the wall. And it got him thinking about how a child, what would a child like that be thinking? And, if you're a 1-year-old, you don't have a political vision. You're not involved in politics. What would you be thinking about this? So he decided to, and this work, by the way, is in a Mexican city of Tecate, which is an hour southeast of San Diego. Okay. So what he did is he reached out. He already had a connection to a friend who's a curator in Mexico called Pedro Alonso. And for 5 months, they scouted the border zone on the Mexican side in particular, which had access to the wall. And as a part of this research project, they met a mother who had an infant that looked very much like the child in his dream. And he asked to photograph. He asked for permission. The mother said yes. Her son is named Caquito. And, he said he wanted to put this image of Caquito on the scaffolding above the wall. And she said, I hope this will help people see us differently than what they hear in the media, that they will stop taking us like criminals or rapists. And she said, I hope that in that image, they won't only see my kid, they will see us all. Okay. So then he posted this picture on Instagram, and all of a sudden, because he has a huge, network, all these people around the world are seeing this image. And so he decided to geotag it so people would know where the location was. And all of a sudden it's becoming this pilgrimage site, and it's sparking these conversations of people through the space of the wall, and people are gathering and meeting and talking. So the artist is not physically present. The artist has done this artwork and then he's somewhere else, but the encounter is continuing. Do you see what I mean? How it can be at different stages? It's still happening. Okay. And so he said that experience is intimate to each person who will see the piece. I won't even hear about it. He won't hear those conversations. But let's see the next slide. But on the last day of the project, they did something that sort of furthered this idea of connection. Okay. And they had this big potluck, and they had what's interesting is they actually also had a part of this in sharing this meal together. Okay. One on the US side and one on the Mexican side, but they also had musicians. They had a band playing Mexican music, and some of the band members were in Mexico and some of the band members were on the US soil, but they were playing the same music. And so it was all these different ways of bringing arts together. And one thing that he pointed out was that the conversations that were happening here, next slide. Next slide, please. The conversation that were happening weren't necessarily political conversations. They were sort of these human conversations. It was getting people out of the us, them, us, them, us, them. Should there be a wall, not a wall? But just having conversations, making human connections, and seeing things in a different way. He talks about it as a love message. Okay. So next slide, please. So here's another one that I had a personal relationship to this particular project. This is called High Water Line. And it's called High Water Line Reimagine the Future. And the artist who organized it is Eve Mosher. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Well, Eve has worked in different communities to bring attention to sea level rise. And, one of those communities was Little Havana. And so I was one of the people that she reached out to among other community residents and activists and leaders. And so we were part early in that process. And this is an example of the making of the art. It's happening right now. And collectively, people are part of the art making. So here you have, see this guy, he's putting down a blue chalk line and marking the space where sea level is expected to reach in the next couple of years or in a certain period of time. I can't remember. But in the process of doing that, next slide, please. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Next, right there. Okay, so in the process of doing this, so there were already community members who agreed to participate and be part of this process. But as they're walking and taking turns with this chalk laying down device. All these other community members are like, what are you doing? What's happening? And the conversations are happening. And all of a sudden people are talking about how sea level rise will have a tangible impact in this specific community. And it turns from something that's a very abstract idea to something that's very tangible. And now neighbors are talking to neighbors about this and taking turns. So what we discovered is that people would like, oh, I want to push it. You see a child here pushing it. So, and then it goes to this other level. Next slide. Where Eve herself has this amazing social network. So you see here, 200,000 views. So she's a photographer. And so she's taking photos of these and she's posting these photos. And now even more people are learning about this project. So its impact is continuing and continuing. It's helping to spark these conversations. It's also helping to build awareness. And Eve Mosher, I highly recommend you check. I'll put a link to her website because she's doing all kinds of really amazing, innovative projects. And she's really good about the participation with community members. So next, I want to feature another artist, another case study, the Reclamation Project. Okay. And Javier Cortada, he is an artist who wanted to build awareness about the role of mangroves in protecting our coastlines. Okay, and he was interested in this fact that there used to be so many mangroves in what is now Miami Beach. Development destroyed those mangroves, and so what he did is he started a conversation with these retail business owners in Miami Beach to ask their permission if he could put these little mangrove seedlings in these plastic cups and suction cup them to their windows with these little cards that talked about this project. And people, through the cards, by finding out about the cards, they could be engaged at a later point, next slide, in the planting of the mangroves. So the reclamation of the coast by the mangroves. And this is so much deeper than I have time to share right now. But this is an example of think outside the box. It's not, the art can be happening in all kinds of different ways. And as creative people, these are kinds of ideas that you can come up with, but especially when you're in conversation with others. So start writing down your ideas right away. So people started to think, in the little cards, it was saying too, mangroves used to be here. So it was helping people to think about place, to think about land in a different kind of way. And one thing, one opportunity you might think about is what's happening with statues right now and the conflicts that are happening about monuments. Well, what are different ways for artists to sort of tell stories that are not being told? What are really creative ways to do that? Okay, so next slide, please. So again, I cannot emphasize it enough. You want to listen and learn from stakeholders and community partners. Pay attention. One artist I know of, a Native American artist, and he started to get really engaged in creating his own posters and working with other Native artists around COVID because he was on social media, okay, really reaching, his broader community. And he's like, oh my gosh, people are really confused about COVID. I need to do something about this. And so he organized all these artists to work on their posters that would specifically, would be very effective to the Native community. So paying attention, looking at, again, the needs and the opportunities, but also, Juan Sanchez, who I mentioned earlier from Motel Stories, he talks about how so many of his ideas were inspired by being on public transportation. He started to think about the connections between neighborhoods and the people that he was seeing on these buses, the everyday folks whose stories weren't being told. And so in those sort of moments of being there, being present, listening in a grocery store, or, talking to folks who are working on the front lines, or talking with somebody whose family has been directly impacted by police violence. I mean, think about how this sort of knowledge that you have in these relationships and this listening that you're doing can inform your project. So next slide. So another part of this sort of early image that I gave you, the flower-like image, was, what do you bring to the table? And one thing to think about is, again, the ties that you already have to a particular community, group, stakeholder group, but also the deep knowledge that you might have about the issue, the cause, the concern. Maybe you have an amazing social network, okay? Maybe you are really a great collaborator. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're the kind of person who's better doing the research behind the scenes, okay? And doing the investigation. You like doing the sort of prep for a project. So maybe you need to bring somebody into your team that helps balance out what you don't feel is comfortable doing, okay? So next slide. So again, think about this intersection. Where does your art come together to bring it all together? Where's that sort of creative opportunity in that intersection? Next slide, please. So when you are thinking about formulating your project, here are some tips. I've been talking about equity early in the process. Who is part of your team? Who is that project partner? Is that project partner, and are the people who work in that nonprofit, for example, are they reflective themselves of the community that you want to be working with? Who is coming to when they do community meetings? Who's going to those meetings? Is it the same few hardcore, community residents, or is it a broader cross section? Carefully be thinking about partners. I'll talk more about that later. Relationships. You want to protect those relationships. Trust is everything. And I'll also mention that too. You want to keep nurturing those relationships. Team. Oftentimes you can't do this by yourself. And even beyond having a partner, having a fellow artist or somebody else who can complement you in some kind of way, they're much better organized, or they can help you do the grant writing. Think about who you want on your team, apart from just your community partner. Simplify. You do not want to embarrass yourself by trying to do too much, okay? And then that goes hand in hand with being realistic, okay, about what you can accomplish given the time that you have, the time that your partner has, the urgency, the funding that you might have, etc. And then, thinking as a part of that, of the scope of your project, and doing the necessary research. I do really get frustrated that none of folks do the research ahead of time, and they end up further reinforcing stereotypes, for example, and working again with the same groups around the same issues over and over again, instead of bringing something new and important and awakening. Okay, so and then again, also think about the process. So next slide. A good example of thinking about process is this particular organization called iDream. They work with different projects in different parts of the country around race and class equity. But let's go to the next slide. Because they have a really great way of talking about their process. So this is something to think about. In their process, they talk about the first stage is this listening. Okay, so they have their staff, they have a methodology, they have a curriculum, but they're working with their staff. They want to sort of know more about what is going on, listening to the stakeholders. This is what I've been emphasizing again, over and over again, the research. Second, what they call inspiration is those relationships. Who are these community partners that they're working with? And they say they experience this production of these plays to sort of understand how they do this process, what these kinds of plays are like, so that they can work better together. But again, next stage, this is what I'm talking about, where there's a step where the art making is happening in different kinds of stages. So in the process of doing these particular plays, they're engaging the youth that the partners have the connected with, and the youth are sharing their stories, okay, that come through in these theatrical performances. But that's not all. Then these stories are shared with the broader community. And so think about what your process is going to be. It can look different depending on what kind of impact you want to have. If you want to have an impact on policy, well, let me give you an example of that I don't have slides for. But here in South Florida, there's an organization called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And I will never forget how powerful it was to go to to an event that they had where they were talking about their campaign to get farm workers paid a penny more per pound of tomatoes that they were picking. And what they had, it was so creative the way they did that. What they had is they had a bucket filled with the same amount of weight of tomatoes that these workers were having to carry over and over and over again, all day during their workday. And so they invited people to come up and to try lifting this bucket. And the impact that it had to see people who thought they were very strong trying to pick this bucket up and put it on their shoulders, the embodied experience of doing that was so powerful. And what did they do? They had right there, do you care about this? Do you want to make an impact? Here's how you can join. Here's how you can support us. The call to action. Okay, side by side with this powerful experience. And this was a farm worker. The farm worker was there and he spoke in Spanish. It was translated. And so there was this direct interaction happening there. So how can you move people even to the space where they could be affecting policy? And I'm happy to say the Coalition for Immokalee Workers has been extremely effective. They were able to convince Burger King and McDonald's to bargain and negotiate about getting this 1 cent more per pound from the farmers that they were working with. And so this is a very important tool in activism as well. So next slide. This is the last case study I want to mention, but it's called Their Names. And this is a designer. Well, first of all, let me explain the project. This draws from a research project called Fatal Encounters, and it documents the roughly 28,000 fatal encounters citizens have had with the police in the U.S. since the year 2000. So Kim Albrecht, who's a Berlin-based designer, he wanted to take a different approach from these other visualizations, these charts and these graphs showing police fatalities. And he felt that there was something wrong with reducing people's lives to the color red on a bar chart, for instance. And so he wanted to make it easier to see both each individual personal story of what had happened, but at the same time see the sheer scale of police violence. And Their Names is a result of that. But what's interesting too is not only you can, when you put your cursor over it, you see the pop-up with the more detailed information, whatever was what they were able to find. But it also has a survey that pops up, and it asks people to, what did this visualization make them think and feel? What do they think is missing? And then their responses in turn go back to people who are working to reduce police violence. So there are all these creative ways that you can also be working in the online space to share things in a different way, to get people to think in a way that's different, okay? To humanize some broad issue or bring it so that people start to reflect and engage and not, necessarily in this debate kind of way that we see so often right now. So I have a couple quick points that I want to make before I wrap up so I can take questions. Next slide. First, I really urge you to avoid the hero artist syndrome. You don't want to come in, beating your chest like, hey, look, I'm going to save your community type of a thing. If you overpromise and you're working with a partner and your partner has nurtured a long-term relationship with community members, and all of a sudden you're making these promises, and you end up damaging this long-term relationship with the partners, well, you probably, that's not good. You'll probably never work with that partner again. But you haven't made a positive impact. You've actually ended up making a negative impact and further marginalizing a community. So reflect, be aware of your biases, your assumptions, and be careful, because you don't want to end up exploiting communities for your own fame, for your own recognition. You will get some recognition, definitely. But if you're like putting it out there and you're not recognizing your partners and those who are working with you, and it's all about me, 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 me. When I did the summit for arts and civic engagement, I worked with an amazing advisory team from the get-go that was very reflective, very diverse. And so it wasn't just about me. It was a collective. It was volunteers. We had an internship program. So recognize and honor the collective that has been part of this project. And then lastly, in terms of working with partners, next slide, please. Oh, and I'm sorry, here you have more information. I'll share this on my website. But reflect, what is your real motivation about doing this? Is it because you want to be the hero? Okay, careful about that. And you're going to have to be nimble. You may have a set way that you planned out this project, and things often change. Maybe in the process of doing the listening, you discover that, again, some of these assumptions that you had, it's not really working out. You're going to have to kind of change the project in some kind of a way. Okay, so you're going to have to learn how to be flexible. Next slide. So working with partners. Yes, next slide, please. In choosing a partner, I've mentioned this before, but you really want to think about a partner that has genuine relationships with the community that you want to work with. Do your research. There might be some tension or some politics that you are not aware of. So, read about them, talk to people who work with them, find out how trusted they are in the community. You want to choose your partner carefully. And you do want to make, next slide. You do want to make sure that you have a contract. You may want to do this as a volunteer, but you really deserve to be paid and compensated. So this contract protects you. It protects you. It protects the partner. And you want to be clear about your roles and expectations on both sides. You want to think about credit. How do you get credit for what you've done? How you are crediting your partner. You want to think about licensing. You want to think about payment and payment terms, and what does this final product look like, and the scope of the work. So you might do this as a volunteer. There are folks who do this as a volunteer, but think about how you are being compensated in other ways. This could be, again, part of your story. It can give you a great publicity boost. It can give you other benefits. It can give you some very strong relationships. It'll make you look fantastic to funders for future projects that you might want to do. But think, how can you have reciprocity with the partner that you're working with? And it's that partner. You want to give to your community members and stakeholders, but in that working relationship with the partner. So I'm getting some great questions right now. I do want to look at them and respond to them. But before I go into questions, I do want to thank Angela and Jesse with Art Hive, and Madeline Meredith and Jim at Broward County Cultural Division. And now I want to look at your questions here. Somebody was saying funding, developing funding. Well, you're in luck. There is a wonderful website by Americans for the Arts, and it's called Animating Democracy. And Animating Democracy is full of excellent information on getting funding. They have logic models. They have the kinds of detailed information that you would want to keep in mind when you're applying for these kinds of grants. But let me tell you, this is a hot thing right now with funders, okay? And I don't have sample contracts per se, but I can give you links to other places that go in more detail about contracts and about partnerships. But let me see. Can artists bring animating democracy? Thank you. It's animatingdemocracy.org. That's the website. I'll give you some names of some other entities as well. But Animating Democracy is all about arts-based civic engagement. And not only that, they have lots and lots of different case studies. So you can learn about who's been doing maybe certain kinds of work in a particular geographic area or around environmental issues or different kinds of issues. You can see how they did their project. And I do recommend, if you're new to this, reaching out to folks who've done this work. They may be able to share their contract, especially if they don't sort of see you as a competitor in the same kind of work, like they just exclusively work in another part of the country. So there's no chance that you're kind of like going after the same community members, but maybe there's something else that you have in common. But oftentimes they want to help build and spread the word about how to do this effectively. And let me see here. Can artists help bridge tensions by absolutely collaborating with more than one community partner? Many people have more than one community partner. But something to keep in mind, as somebody who's worked, intensively in a specific community, in my case, Little Havana, you need to know about the politics between the partners. If they're both working in the same space, if there's certain overlap, there's oftentimes these community politics or group politics that can be occurring, and it's better that you know about them ahead of time and not after you've already signed the contract. So even before you sign the contract, you want to be doing your due diligence and having conversations with these potential partners and being very open about their relationships to other community partners that you might want to bring into the project. Groups, organizations are struggling themselves for funding, so they can get territorial. So think about, if you're thinking about working with multiple partners, think about how they complement each other. Maybe one group is only working with a particular segment of the community, okay? For example, Arts to Action. Maybe there is a group that's specifically working with veterans. Maybe there's already an existing group that is working with a particular segment of the Middle Eastern community. Yeah, you want them to be together. You want to work with these, different community partners in that particular case. So let me see. The last comment was from my 2-year-old. Okay. Let me see. Other questions. Applying for specific. Is there applying for specific grants already, and also creating a way to open up funding, and how? Well, you're in luck, because the Broward County Cultural Division, that's one of the things that they can help you with, is to learn about the availability of these grants. The arts divisions of your local government, they have information on their websites right now about this kind of work. And but it's not just, it can be foundations, like even private foundations, public foundations. It can be an agency. It can be a community group. And one thing I urge you to think about, you don't have to wait until there already is a spelled out opportunity. You can be the initiator. You can come up with the idea. You see the need, and you make the pitch. And making the pitch and starting the conversation, so many things. This has happened to me oftentimes. It's just, you're the creative person. You have the idea. So don't wait just for the grant to appear. You go and you have a conversation and you say, I can do this. We have some partners. We've been having conversations. Can you support us? Can you fund us? And sometimes funders will be responsive if they already see that you have the synergy and the resources and the talent and the skills and the dedication to make it successful. Are there, let me see, new comment. I think we're.
Hi there.
Yes, and you can get in contact with me. My contact information is below border cross, like crossing a border, bordercross.com. And there's further links and ways that you can reach me. And thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for all of your knowledge and your expertise. I know it was a very, very engaging dialogue you had with everybody. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. So keep in touch, folks, and I wish you the very best with your arts-based civic engagement work.
Thank you. We've learned a lot.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this session today. So much valuable information from two very professional, highly intelligent creatives, just like all of you out there. So as a reminder, before we wrap up, we still have 2 more live sessions this summer. So go right now, mark your calendars, get your pen and paper out. Session number 5 is on how to thrive as an artist. And you will learn about strategies and best practices on how to be successful in your art career. That is going to be on Saturday, August 8th, from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And once again, this is hosted every other Saturday throughout August. And this is brought to you by the Broward Cultural Division. While you're there on social media, make sure to subscribe, whether if you're on YouTube or on Facebook, to like the Broward Cultural Division page. And if you're there, you can stop by and check me out with Art Hive Magazine. We're also on YouTube and Facebook as well. So I hope you stay creative, and I'll see you in 2 Saturdays. Have a great day.